Okay, good evening everyone. Shalom Aleichem. Bruchim Abam. Good to see everybody. Daf Vav Amud Beis. We have a great question. Until now we've been discussing the topic of Yadois Nedarim. Whether Yadois is definitely a concept by Nedarim. Either we learn it out from Ish Ki Yidar Nedar, and the double Lashon teaches us Yados Nedarim K'Nedarim, or we learn out Yados Nedarim from the Zeros. Ish Ki Yidar Nedar, Nazir, Lahazer, we learn that from the Zeros. And there's a machlokes whether Yadayim Sheinu Mechichos, having Yadayim, or Loi having Yadayim. That's a machlokes between Abaye and Rava. Abaye holds Yadayim Sheinu Mechichos, having Yadayim. Rava holds Yadayim Sheinu Mechichos, Loi having Yadayim. We have a question by Gittin, whether Yadayim works by Gittin. Ultimately, the Gemara says that Abaye holds that even though Yados Nedarim K'Nedarim, but Abaye is of the opinion that Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that by Gittin, Yados Gittin, that you need Yadayim Moichichos, Abaye would say no, you don't need Yadayim Moichichos by Gittin. But Rabbi Yehuda holds Yadayim Shein Mechichos Loi Havya Yadayim. The Rabbanan hold Yadayim She'ena Mechichos having Yadayim by Gittin. Rava holds that by Nedarim Yadayim Shein Mechichos Loi Havya Yadayim, but by Gittin they would be Yadayim because a person will not divorce their friend's wife. So one thing we know, Yados Nedarim K'Nedarim. Also, we know Yados Gittin are also is effective. So Yados works by Nedarim. There's a machlokes Abaye and Rava whether they have to be Mechichos. Yados work by Gittin. There's a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan whether they have to be Mechichos. But one thing's for sure: Yados work. Yados are effective both by Nedarim and by Gittin. Now we're going to discuss whether Yados are effective by Kedushin. Now by Kedushin, you need to have an Amira. Kedushin is effectuated in three ways, because of Shtar Babiyah, but you also need Amira. You can't just give a woman a wedding ring and stand on the chuppah. You have to say Hareya Mikudeshesli. But what if you say a quasi statement? Now the question here is not if you need Meichichos or Eino Meichichos. We're asking more basic than that. Do you need to say a full statement by Kedushin, or is a partial statement effective? Even before we get into, well, does it have to be a partial statement that's indicative, that's compelling or not compelling? We're not even discussing whether it has to be compelling or not. We want to know, is there an institution of partial statements by Kedushin? Boy Rab Papa. Yesh yad leKedushin oiloi. Are there yados for Kedushin or not? So Gemara wants to know, hey Chidami, what's the case? So one possible case is Ilema da Amar La Isha. You say to a woman, Hareya Mikudeshesli, behold, you're married to me. And then Va'amar Lechaverta, and you say to her friend, there are two ladies standing there. They're Shprinza and Yenta. By the way, whenever there are two women, you know their names are always Shprinza and Yenta. That's just a klal that we established many Masechtas ago in Yavamis already. Okay, there's Shprinza and Yenta, and you turn to Shprinza and you say Shprinza Hareya Mikudeshesli. Then you turn to her friend, to Yenta, and you say Ve'at Nami, you too. So Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. Hainu Kedushin Atzman, that is Kedushin itself. Now the question is, it's very nice you said to Yenta, you too. Did you give Yenta any money? If you didn't give her money, it can't work. And if you did give her money, in other words, if you gave woman one a wedding ring, and you said Hareya Mikudeshesli, and you gave woman two a wedding ring, and you said, and you too, then obviously that's Kedushin. You know, even if Yados wouldn't work, that's an obvious statement of Kedushin. So what exactly is the case? Did you give her money? Did you not give her money? The Gemara doesn't say. Look in the Ran. The Ran, top Ran says, Boy Rav Papa, yesh yad lekedushin. Afilu biyad moichiach kami baile. The question here is, even if it's a compelling yad, mi amrina, do we say nehi deloy israbi lehu yadais? It's true. There's no pasuk by kedushin that includes yadais behedya. So the Ran is bothered by a question. What do you mean is there yadois by Kedushin? It's not like we have a drasha to say that yadois work for Kedushin. We have a drasha by Nedarim, we have a drasha by Naziros, but we don't have a drasha by Kedushin. So you say, well, we didn't have a drasha by Gittin either. So that's sort of what the Ran is saying. We would gamrina b'mamatzinu b'nedarim. We would make a mamatzinu from nedarim. Mamatzinu is we could apply laws of the Torah from one place to another, even without an explicit drasha, unless you have a reason to differentiate. Or do we say ein yad? Yados do not work. Va'afilu moichiach. Even a yad moichiach would not work by Kedushin. Now, why would it work by Nedarim and not work by Kedushin? The answer is the Nedarim shani. Nedarim is different. The chamiri. Nedarim is very chamor. The afilu b'dibura ba'alma chayli. Nedarim is so chamor that you don't have to do an act, you could just have a statement. So since it's so chamor that you could just make a statement, a partial statement would work. Masha'in came by Kedushin, but by marriage, a statement doesn't work. You need an act. So since there's a halacha that we're lenient by Kedushin, that it's not going to work until you do an act, so then maybe you also need a full-fledged statement. Ma'ashein came b'kedushin shein tzrichen eza ma'isa kesef ashtar oibia. So in other words, the shaila is, do we say, just like by Nedarim, partial statement works, so too by Kedushin? Or do we say, well, no, maybe only by Nedarim, where it's so chamor, it's so stringent, we even allow statements without acts, so maybe even a partial statement would work. But by Kedushin, where it's a requirement, we're lenient that it's not going to work until you act, maybe a partial statement won't work. So now, regarding what we asked before, did you give this second woman money? Let's see a little bit further in the Gemara. The Gemara says, Ela kagain de amar la isha. You said to a woman, Hareya mekudeshesli, behold, you're married to me. Va'amar la lechavetim, you said to the friend, Ve'at, and you. You didn't say, and you also. You said, and you. So now the question is, that's a yad. Mi amrina, and do we say, ve'at nami, amar la lechaverta? Do we say, and you also, he's saying to the friend? Do we interpret his words, and you also, meaning, I'm marrying you also? Ve'tavsi ba kedushin, and kedushin is chal. Lechaverta. Or maybe ve'at chazoi amar la lechaverta. Maybe, and you look into whether you're interested in marrying. He said to the friend, v'loi tafsi ba kedushin lechaverta, and the kedushin is not toifes. Meaning, if he gave money to one woman and said, marry me, and he said to the second woman, and you also, then that's not a yad. That's explicit proposal of marriage. But if he says to woman one, well, behold, you are married to me, and the other woman, he said, and you, what does he mean, and you? And you also? Or does it mean, and you, think about whether you want to get involved in this kind of relationship also? Now, the question is he giving the second woman money or not? If he gave her money, then obviously he wants to marry her. And if he didn't give her money, then how in the world could the marriage be effective? So the Ran says something very interesting. He gave the first woman 2 prutais. He gave the first woman 2 prutais. One for her, and one potentially she could act as a shliach on behalf of the other one. So it's not explicit kedushin. After all, he didn't give money to the second one. But it will be effective because he said, and you. Look in the Ran, the Amar la leisha hareya mekudeshes li v'nasan la shtei prutais v'amar lechaverta v'at mi aminan v'at nami amar la lechaverta v'chi amra denichala, when she says she wants to be married, have a mekudeshes. The chaverta kibla b'shlichusa, her friend accepted it for her. Kedekaimelan beperek ha'ish mekadesh the isha nasa shliach lechaverta. However, the Ran says that you can't say that he gave a pruta to the first woman and a pruta to the second one, because then there would be no question at all. He's not saying, and you consider whether you want to get married or not. Obviously, he's proposing to her. Or do we say, look in the next round, You'll say, how could you interpret it that he's saying, and you consider whether you want to do this? It's not mashma that way. Diafa gav dolay mashra hachi, even though it's not mashma that, v'yad moichiachu, and it's a compelling handle, diva'at nami kamar, it's compelling that he's saying, and you also, maybe we say there are no yados for kedushin. Kivan de ein yad, maybe because there are no yados, loy mahani hanach kedushin. It's not affected. V'amrinan v'ad chazoi come, and he's saying, and you see if you want to do this. Now, the Gemara continues. Umimi boy leila Rav Papa. Did Rav Papa have such a shaila, whether the institution of yados applies to kedushin? V'hamida amar le Rav Papa la Abaye, but Rav Papa once said to Abaye, I can't believe it. Does Shmuel hold by kedushin yadayim that are not compelling are yadayim? Misavar Shmuel, does Shmuel hold yadayim shen mechichas havin yadayim? That implies that Rav Papa holds yadayim work for kedushin. He just holds they have to be moichiach. So how can you say Rav Papa had a question whether the institution of handles work for kedushin, but Rav Papa once expressed incredulousness. No, there is a better way to say it. Incredulity. How do you pronounce it? Incredulity. Alan is giving me official approval. Rav Papa once expressed surprise, that's easier to say, that Shmuel held non-compelling handles work. That implies that he held handles work. It's just they have to be compelling. So how can you say Rav Papa wasn't sure whether yados work for kedushin, but we know he held that the yadayim do work, they just have to be moichiach. So Meklal Desvir Leila Rav Papa, the Yesh Yad LeKedushin. Look in the Ran. V'hamida Amar Le Rav Papa LaBaye, Misavar Shmuel, Yadayim She'in Moichichas Havin Yadayim. Gabi Kedushin in Masech LeKedushin, Parakam de Kedushin. Meklal Desvir Leila Rav Papa, the Yesh Yad LeKedushin. Dimidoloi Metame Ela Biyad She'in Moichiach. The fact that he only questioned a handle that's not compelling, Meklal de Moichiach, that proves pshitale the havayad, that it is a yad. Says the Gemara, no. Really, I'll tell you, Rav Papa wasn't sure whether yados work for kedushin. The reason why he was incredulous about Shmuel is he wasn't sure that yados worked. But one thing he knew, that if they do work, it can't be they work even if it's not moichiach. So he's just discussing, really, also, he happened to know Shmuel holds that yadayim have to be moichiach for kedushin. So, irrespective of what Rav Papa's personal shita was, which may be that he's not sure if they work or not, he was just asking about the opinion of Shmuel. So the Ran does not have the word chada in his gersa, but migu mai desvir leila Shmuel amar leila Abaye. Regarding what Shmuel held, Rav Papa was talking to Abaye. Says the Ran, Dinahid Rav Papa masafkale. It's true Rav Papa is masupa. Dedilma ein yad kedushin klal. Maybe yados don't work for kedushin. Mi aloi matzi lak shuya alad. You can't ask on him. The Shmuel from Shmuel. Dedilma ius really the yad. He holds yados work. He was just asking a stira one onto the other. Now the Ran on the first wide line asks a very interesting question. Do yados work by gittin? Yeah, we had earlier, it's machlokes, Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds yadayim she'ein mechichos loy havin yadayim. The Rabbanan hold yadayim she'ein mechichos havin yadayim. But everyone holds the concept of yadayim work for gittin. So if it works for gittin, why wouldn't it work for kedushin? What's a papa shaila? Yados work for divorce, why shouldn't they work for marriage? Vim taimar umay kamasafkale b'kedushin. What is Rav Papa suffix by kedushin? Ma'ishnam migitin the kulayama yesh yad kedemuchasugin del elv loy pligi. They only argue biyad shinu moichiach. You ready for this? Maybe yadayim only work by gittin. You know why? Because we're very lenient by gittin. because gittin needs an act. So since it needs an act, and without an act, so therefore, even a partial statement would work. But in our case, Kedushin doesn't need an act. You say, of course it does. You have to give her money. No, in this case, you gave both prutas to the other woman. So there's no act to this woman. This woman is actless. So the Ran says, Yeshama, the Shani get kiven the Ika Maisa, the Hainu Nesinas Haget Liyada. So then the act lends more power, let's say it better. When you do an act, so then it's very indicative that your statement is a statement of gittin. Masha'in came bebayin delechadahu diyav shtei prutas. But in the case of kedushin, you're giving the 2 coins to one lady. So there's no indication through your act what your words are saying. So maybe only by gittin yadais work, because the act lends credibility and credence to the words you're saying. But there's no act in the case by kedushin because you gave both coins to one woman. Okay, that's sugya number 1. Next Gemara. So there's a new topic. Okay, next topic. Is there a yad for peah? Is there a yad for peah? We know that you have to leave a corner of your field off for the aniyim. I want to tell you an amazing idea. This is out of this world, just on the subject of peah in general. You know, we know that there's one part of the Harabayis that was never destroyed, and that's the Kaisel HaMaravi, right? You know, historically, Kaisel HaMaravi is not a wall of the Beis HaMikdash. It's the retaining wall of the Temple Mount. People think this is the wall of the Beis HaMikdash. Okay. Let them think that. It happens not to be. It's the retaining wall of the Temple Mount, but it was never destroyed. What's the idea that the Western Wall was never destroyed? So the Rebbe of Rabbi Shaila of Karastir says an amazing idea. Avram Avinu called the Harabayis Har. Yitzchak called it Sadeh, Yaakov called it Bayis. But Yitzchak called it Sadeh, yeah? Now God keeps the Torah. So if the Beis HaMikdash is a field, he has to give us a peah. So the peah is the haraba, is the Kaisel Maravi. It's the peah that God always leaves for the Jewish people. Anyway, so the question is, in order for something to be peah, it needs an oral declaration. You have to say, Harezu peah, this is peah. But what if you say a handle? In other words, you said a partial statement, and do partial statements work by peah? Boira papa, yesh yad lepeah, ein yad lepeah. Do yadais, do handles work for peah? So Gemara says, hey, then what's the case? Amar hadin ugya lava peah. If you say this piece of land or patch should be peah, and then you say v'hadin nami, and this patch also, then that's not a yad. He peah mal yasi. That's an explicit statement. Ki kami baile. The question is, kagoin the amar v'hadain. You said this piece should be peah, and this v'lay amar nami, and you didn't say and this also. Mai, what do you mean? Look in the Ran. The Ran says, Boira Papa, 3rd wide line, Yesh Yad Lepeh Kolomer Imtim Solaymer Kedushin Ein Yad. If you want to say Yadais don't work for Kedushin, Deloy Iskish Nedarim, that Kedushin is not compared to Nedarim at all, Klal. Peah de Iskish Mai. Peah, we're going to see, you can make the cases compared to Nedarim. So what's the case? If you said Hadin Ugya, Ugya is an aruga, is a row. Vikari Le Ugya, it's called the word ugya. Ugya usually means ditch. Al shem charetz sha'osin sfivas aruga. Usually the way you make fields is you make ditches around the mound. Milashon ugyos legafanim b'may katan. Meklal di amar teheves sada. Okay, comes the Gemara. The Gemara says something very interesting, something a little bit difficult. And the Gemara says, well, what's the case over here? You said this piece should be peah and this. Now the first piece, did it have a big enough shiur to be considered peah? It had to have, because if it didn't have, obviously when you said v'dain and this, you meant to add the other piece, otherwise the first piece is meaningless. In other words, that first piece of peah you separated. Does it meet the halachic requirements in size or not? If it doesn't, then obviously when you say and this, you're adding to the first piece just to make it effective. So it must be the first piece was a qualified peah. And look in the that implies, says Gemara, Meklal dekhi amar sadeh kula to have a peah. That implies if you say my whole field should be peah, have your peah. It's effective. Now, how is it mashma that even if you say your whole field should be peah, it's effective? The Ran says Meklal di amar to have a sadeh kula peah, have a kula peah. Devade Rapapa b'chai gavim komi boile. Rapapa definitely was talking about such a case. Debahahi ogya kamaisa, that even if in the first ditch Ika shiura, there is the requisite shira peah. Otherwise, the ilai, afilim tim salayma inya peah. Even if the others don't work for peah, this would work. Peah mal yasahi. This would be an effective peah. Devade certainly kivan sheis chalases peah. Once you began to make peah, when you said and this, you meant that it should be added to the first offering, just so that it should be effective. Ki amar v'hadein, when you said and this, legamra niskavin, you intended to complete it, so it must be the first patch had the share of peah. And even in a case where the whole field is peah, even if you're making the whole field peah, lavadai kivan deika shir peah bekamaisa, since there's a shir peah in the first piece, mi boile, we have a question. So the Gemara says, yeah, no problem. It's true. If you make your whole field peah, it's effective. In V'hatanya, we learned in a braysa, minayin shemroit zalasis kol sadeo peah. So how do you know if you want to make your whole field peah, you could? Talmud lomer pa'as sadecha, the corner of your field, that your whole field could be peah. So now back to the ranch, back to the question, are there yados for peah? Mi amrina, do we say, kivan de iskash lekarbanos? Since peah is compared to karbanos, ma karbanos yesh lahem yad, just like karbanos have a yad, af peah yesh la yad, peah would also have handles. Or do we say no, peah is only compared to karbanos, that if you delay it, you're over about ta'achar. Dilma ki iskish l'bal ta'achar with the iskish. Maybe they're only compared that if you delay peah, you're over the lav of bal ta'achar, delaying, just like when you delay a carbon. But it's not compared regarding other halachos, namely, it's not compared regarding yadais. So the Ran asks, what do you mean maybe it's only compared for bal ta'achar? There's a well-known rule, ein hekesh lemechza. So the Ran says, here it might be different, because even though you don't make a hekesh part way, as we're going to see, the comparison between peah and carbon, it never really says peah explicitly. So since it's a very weak hekesh, this type of hekesh, where we're comparing not explicit peah to karbanos, but karbanos to a veiled reference to peah, regarding that kind of hekesh, you could say maybe it's only compared for Baal Ta'achar and not for other things. Okay? And next week we'll learn what exactly is the hekesh between karbanos and peah. And that's all. That's Vav Amid Beis for you. Good?
How could she be a shliach without being made a shliach on the second pruta?
How could the woman be a shliach for another woman
without being made a shliach? She gave her two prutas, so therefore, maybe she's supposed to go from there?
Good question. Because normally, we say that you can't be zoicha in kedushin for someone, because kedushin is not necessarily a zuchus. You know, zachin la'adam shloi b'fana, but not every woman is going to say it's a zuchus to be married. Right? She could say. Now the Ran adds, "V'chi amra denichala have a mekudeshes." When she says, yeah, she's pleased with it, and she's revealing that it is a zuchus, it works. But the thing is, at the time,
So we consider it the same as chiyah? It doesn't say it's the same as shlichus, but she wasn't made a shliach, so.
well, the way Zechia works, it's anan sadi, she would have made a shliach.
If she was made a shliach, then it's not a yad anymore, then it's clear.
Well, just because she made the woman a shliach, but he's the one who has to make the statement.
He has to make her a shliach, not her.
No. she's a shliach to be makabel the kedushin.
But then it goes down to the Ron further down where he said he didn't do an act. By giving the second pruta, why is that not an act of kedushin?
The answer is because he didn't do an act to the second woman.
Of course, he only had to give one pruta. He did an extra act of giving the second pruta.
Maybe he get.
Less of an act than what happened by
Question: when you married your wife, you get the ring was worth one pruta?
I believe it's more.
A little bit more, no?
Yeah.
So he gave the first woman 2 prutais, but he never did an act. Now,
Why is that not a my condition? The second woman, I don't understand. If she's a shliach, she did it by condition. The second woman.
no, it wasn't. The act wasn't to the second woman. We have the act was to the first woman. By Gittin, where he did an act to the second woman. That act gives us interpretation in his words. But when it comes to Kedushin, he didn't act at all toward the second one. It's very possible he gave the first one 2 prutas. What?
The thing is not even a yad because the act. Really clear.
No, it is a yad. No, listen carefully. It is a yad. The question though is, maybe the institution of yados don't work. Aya works by Gittin. That's because the act that he did to the woman gives us, puts into context what his words mean. Because he handed something to this woman, so now we say the words he said are interpreted as Harya Megureshes, but he never did an act to this woman. So you say, well then how is he married? Because we could say, based on the words, that the extra pruta he gave to the first one was for the second one, and the first one was acting as a shliach for the second one. Again, she never asked her to accept it for her. She on her own, she becomes a shliach.
We're trying to prove from that, therefore, that
Okay.
it's not necessarily yados by kedushin versus get.
No, we're not proving. We're asking.